From Einmal Productions, this is the original Singletrack podcast bringing you episode 310. I'm your host, Matthias Eichler. Glad you are here. As always, this show is brought to you by Electric Cable Car, publishing daily a global perspective on our mountain culture and of the business of the outdoors and the sport of trail and ultra running. Visit electriccablecar.com to stay up to date. This very special episode is part of our Hardrock 100 coverage. Visit electriccablecar.com daily to get a unique behind-the-scenes look and get a sense of what makes this such a special race in such a special place. I cannot wait to experience it all myself and share it with you. In this episode, I'm chatting with friend of mine and Olympia local, Michael Marchand. He made it into Hardrock through the lottery, has been training like crazy in one of our local city parks. We are chatting about this on the show. Be sure to check out Michael's Strava to see him run 30 plus miles and 10,000 feet of vert for a training run on a hill less than a mile long, just meters from his house. Be sure to follow Michael on the tracker page as he makes his way around the San Juan mountains. I will be providing updates on his run and all the others. But for now, let's get to it. Here is Michael.
Yeah, see, that's one of those things. I was just talking to my daughter about this because this is my last long weekend this weekend. And she's just says to me, how can you run 35 miles or 10 hours with no mute, like nothing, like nothing? How do you do that? And I just said, I've never done it, so I don't know what I'm missing. Yeah. It's kind of like ignorance is bliss, I guess. But the other thing is I just like being present in the moment. It's just being that there.
Yeah.
And just seeing where your mind goes. Where are you going to go next?
And I feel like also on trails, it's a little bit something different. I feel like on trails, you really need less distraction. I often put headphones on if I'm like doing road miles and I just have
I agree with you.
Just do like an hour here and you're like, ugh, I really don't have, But there are days too where I spend a lot of time with the headphones on, a lot of times with the screens and stuff. And I cannot wait to get out and be present and be like away from, I still track my run on my watch, but I'm not really connected to like 14 different things, right?
Yeah, and that's also something I find very funny is when you're doing, and I'm sure you have the same experience, if you're doing a really long run and it's anything longer than like 5 hours, let's say, like the watch is a nice thing to have, but at some point in time, the only reason you have it is to kind of give you a ballpark of like, okay, how far have I gone and how long have I been out here? But after that, what was my last mile? Does it matter? It's mile 28. It's like I still got 10 left or I got 5 left. It doesn't matter. It's like if someone said to me, "Oh, it looks like your splits were getting a little, you're starting to run a little slower." I'm like, that was the least of my concern.
Yeah.
My biggest concern was I was just focused on getting it done.
That's also one of the main reasons why I got into trail running, right? Because they did this pressure and this capital city marathon, right? This road marathon was such a weird experience in that sense because I've never cared about splits. I've never cared about specific finish times or anything like that, right? It was
that's the only race that's the only road race I usually run a year. That's the only one, and only because it goes by my house, and I don't really have a choice in the morning because I can't really get anywhere. The 5 mile mark, like the chalk is still out with the arrows in front of my house.
Fantastic.
And the 24 mile mark's at the end of the block for the marathon.
Yeah.
So what I always do every year is I run down to the start, run the marathon and run home. And it's about 50K total day.
Yeah.
And the one thing I do is, and it's really funny because I went back and looked at my splits after this year, is I always try to run around a 10-minute pace. That's all I want to do is finish somewhere around 420, 422. It doesn't matter, whatever. And I looked at my splits over the last 3 years and they're like, or 4 years, and it's like 9:57, 9:55, 10:02, 9:58.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. And this year was really hard because I was coming off a 100-mile week and ran it, and I was going into another like 95, 96-mile week.
And,
So, and I know how you must have felt after doing your first one. It doesn't get any easier as you do more. There's, pavement and being in different shoes, and just like I felt beat up. I felt pretty beat up. I actually took an extra day
yeah.
off, just because, man, just running on the roads after doing that much trail work hurts.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting because a lot of people said that road marathons hurt so much more. And I felt like the last 3 miles really hurt for me too. Once I essentially came past ran past your house. It was really hard and I slowed down quite a bit. But for me, I felt like it was more getting really hot. It was hot then
Oh
that
gosh,
late
yeah,
part of
you
the
were out
day,
there.
right?
It was getting hot. Yes,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was.
And so, but overall, when it comes to recovery and stuff, and even during the race, just because you were able to sort of lock in and sort of keep the pace, I felt like it's still much easier than a trail race. Like a
Yeah,
trail
it's
race,
much. I agree.
you have so much problem solvings you have to do. You're longer
Right,
out, you have to deal with the body breaking down in all kinds of different
right.
ways. This was a race where I felt like I ran with you for the first mile, and then I locked in at my time. And then I just sort of kept the same movement for the entire race. And
Right.
yeah, I slowed down towards the end because I sort of ran out of, fuel and will to live. But overall, I think I thought it was easier than a big trail race.
Yeah, my problem was so I felt really good. I was really locked in. Everything was going great. I got very fortunate in that Herb was on his bike. And
Oh,
so Herb caught up with me around mile 16 on Lemon, where it gets kind of
mhm.
after the hill on Woodard Bay, where you just feel like you're in no man's land.
Yeah.
It's right after like mile 15. So you're kind of you're nowhere and onto Friendly Grove. So those like 3 miles are brutal. Um, and so he kind of distracted me. So I had a pace. I was running like 9:45. So I was feeling pretty good. And then my feet started to hurt and I started to blister. And I think it was
Uh,
because, to your point, I'm not used to towing off as much
mhm,
when you're pushing off on the road,
mhm,
and I'm used to more of a shuffle.
mhm,
And I haven't done a lot of that. So I started to blister, and like my big toes, and it really started to hurt.
mhm.
So I slowed up on the uphill climb on east side a little. But then the weird thing is, once I got by my house, once I got back on flatter
Mhm,
downhill, it felt okay. The hard thing was pushing off.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so once I got on the downhill, heading back down toward the finish, I was fine. And like my closing miles were like 9:30, 9:35. I felt much better. But it was really, yeah, to your point, it did start to get hot. And I think it's just weird because, unlike the trail, there's no reason to really stop.
Mhm,
Now,
mhm,
on the trail, if you hit a sharp incline or something like that, you may slow up or power hike or do something different. On the road, there's kind of no excuse. You can pretty much run everything. Everything's runnable. So it's a very different experience for an individual who spent a lot of time on the trails, who can run easily for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, but you're not actually running it all,
mhm,
as
mhm,
opposed to you're on the road, your cadence, you're trying to just keep that going, and you don't want to walk. And I actually walked through a lot of the aid stations just to make sure I was staying hydrated and
mhm,
drinking, and
mhm,
I just and took that walk break because that's 5 hours of repetitive stress that you don't experience on trails necessarily.
yeah, yeah.
Or you experience, and here's the other thing is, it's repetitive stress, usually on a set of muscles that, yes, they get stressed, but they're not stressed for that long a duration all the time, because you're either going up and you have different muscles engaged, or going even downhill and it's eccentric feeling, and they're engaged in a different way. But on the roads, you're pretty much engaged like the same muscles all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be a struggle bus. And I watch, the other thing is it always cracks me up is I watch people and I just make a mental note and go, I wonder when I'm going to see that person. Like, what mile am I going to see that person? Because they're going out way too fast.
Yeah. Eventually you're going to catch up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's your experience, especially with that particular marathon, but also in general, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's, in the Wayback Machine, I used to run marathons. I've run Boston 4 times. I've run New York 4 times. I've run Cal International, Vermont City, Philly. I used to be a road runner. I used to do a lot more racing. I had a few, 250s, 255s, 258s in that range. I used to love running halves. Halves were more fun because you could just knock them off and get them done. And, I could run 6-minute pace for a half. But then, to your point is then the pull of the ultra came, and I just got tired about 5-6 years ago. I just got tired of, I made a goal of trying to train to see if I could qualify for the Boston Marathon again. And I just got tired of getting injured all the time. I just found that the more I trained on roads, the more injured I got.
Okay.
And I just needed to reassess. And when I was much younger, back in, I want to say it was 95 or 6, I did a 100-mile stage race in the Himalayas. I ran in India.
Oh, fantastic. That's amazing.
And that was like a life-altering experience.
How did you find out about that? How did you get into that?
Yeah, so it's a really funny story. I think it was 90, it must have been 96. So was it? Yeah, it must have been 96, because what happened was I was training really hard in the beginning of the season in 96, because I wanted to run in the Boston Marathon, and I wanted to run a qualifier. So I was targeting a fall marathon for my qualifier, and I couldn't make up which one I wanted to do. I was looking at Philly because I had run it before, and then I was also looking at Portland, which is a really great race, which I wound up running some years later. And that was back when, in the late 90s, when Portland Marathon was really up and coming. And it was a great race. So at this time, I was actually working for Runner's World. So I worked for Runner's World magazine.
Hey.
So I was training with a bunch of guys who were elite athletes. I had friends of mine who I was training with who would go to the Olympic trials, and the Lehigh Valley Roadrunners Club, which I was a member of. I can say that in 2000 and 2001, they won the team competition at the Boston Marathon for fastest
Amazing.
team in the race. And I can proudly say that I had no contribution to that whatsoever, other than getting a ride up to the race with them. But the funny thing was, I got into the Vermont City Marathon in May, and I was going to help a friend of mine pace, because they wanted to try to qualify for Boston. So we got into, we're training, and it was one of those weird things where it was, I think I got halfway through the race, and I'm looking at my watch and I'm going, I'm feeling pretty good. Maybe they had already gone. They were, and I was like, and then I realized I thought it was an out and back course, and it turned out it was a loop. So you're kind of out there already. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just try to bring it in and see what happens. And I literally finished like in 3:09:30 or 3:09:30, or what was it?
I love that you remember.
Yeah, I was like 30 seconds under the qualifying time. So I qualified for Boston. It was just like, wow, I didn't expect to do that today. That was not in the game plan. So now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have the fall wide open now. I can do anything I want. And when I was at when I was at Runner's World, I was really friendly with Bart Yasso. And if for those who on the podcast who know who Bart Yasso is, he's one of the, I would say he was the mayor of running at his time in at Runner's World, and he's like beloved voice and sage runner himself. He is most known for creating what is known as the Yasso 800s, which is a training mechanism in which you run 800s in the speed you want to do your marathon, and you build up from 4 to like 10 or 12. Meaning that if you want to run a 3:30 marathon, you do 800s in 3 minutes 30 seconds, and it equates out to the thresholds you need to do to meet your desired pace, and it works. It works. It's like a great training method. So anyway, Bart had done this race years ago, and he mentioned it to me, and I was just like, wow, that sounds really cool. And having studied philosophy in college, and I was interested in Eastern philosophy and what what the religions and the peoples were like over there, I decided, you know what? I found this race. I'll go do it. And so, man, talk about ignorance. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea. I mean, this race started, I think, at 5,000 feet and went to 12,000. And then we spent the rest of and the first day was like 20 something miles. And we spent the rest of the time running pretty much at that altitude. But it was spectacular. It was an amazing experience. I came back from that going, yeah, it made me appreciate, I think as a kid growing up, how much time I used to spend in the woods, like around my house. Just we would go out and play in the woods for days. That's what you did in the summer. You got up in the morning, maybe got a canteen packed lunch, threw a backpack on, and went out into the woods or went hiking or did whatever.
Yeah.
And it made, getting back, as you were saying earlier about how you don't need as much when you're out there, it just made you feel like you're a kid again. So it's like it's like recapturing your childhood. So after doing that, then of course I got married, had kids, put everything on hold for like a decade plus before I kind of came to revisit ultras or just running in general. And as I was saying, I kept getting injured. And the blessing and the curse of COVID was that there were no races. And I decided at that point in time I had to change what I was doing. I was getting hurt too frequently. It was really bothering me. So I started reading up on a lot of things online, and stumbled across in my travels was, the Maffetone method and heart rate training. And I'd always heard about it, just, from working at Runner's World, and also the whole 80-20 principle with Matt Fitzgerald and things of that nature. But I really thought to myself, wow, this sounds kind of cool. I wonder if I could do it. And as I was researching it, I found like one of my childhood, I wouldn't even say childhood, one of my teenage idols in any athletic endeavor was Mark Allen, the triathlete. And he was just like an insane athlete. And what I loved about Mark Allen was how he could run a marathon so fast in an Ironman, and catch people, like run people down. I'm like, how do you run someone down after a 2.4 mile swim and 110 mile bike or whatever? How do you run someone down?
Yeah.
But I found out he used this training method. And so I decided to give it a whirl, and I started training by heart rate. And it was, I swear to God, the most frustrating thing in the world. I wanted to quit after a couple of weeks. It drove me crazy. I couldn't keep my heart rate down. And I began to realize because I was so overtrained. Like, I was one of those guys who would go out and hammer 5, 6, 7 miles every morning around the lake in Olympia at a ridiculous, 8-minute pace. And, I was the quintessential Western, philosophical runner where if you don't throw up at the end of your workout, it wasn't a good workout kind of attitude. And I didn't understand.
No
I
wonder you
was
got injured all the time,
exactly.
right?
I was so overtrained. I mean, a great example is I did a run yesterday, a 4 mile run around my block. My heart rate was around 135, 136. I was averaging 902 pace.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
did the same run like in the beginning of my heart rate training, and my pace was like 12 and a half
Mm-hmm.
at the same heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's how overtrained I just couldn't keep my heart rate down.
Mm-hmm.
So I started training by heart rate, and that led me into my first, actually it led me into my first 100. I did a 24-hour race before that, and I felt broken after I finished that. I ran, if you remember, they used to have a 24-hour race in DuPont.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I love that. God, I wish they would start that back up again. It was just nice to have that race so close.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I did one of the Yeti races, which they have up in the Easton Hyack area,
Mm-hmm.
on the trail up there, and I don't want to say it felt easy, but I ran 100 miles. I think it was like around 25 and a half hours, 100 miles. And get this, here's the funny part. So we're on the I forget what the bike trail is called there, but it's old railroad line.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's still trail nonetheless with rocks and everything. I did the race in a pair of Brooks Adrenalines. I didn't even have trail shoes.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I finished that race, and I just remember going, "Wow!" I felt like, "Wow, okay, I think I've discovered something here." And then that led me into,
I mean,
my
that's a huge jump, right? Going
yeah,
from this super focused road marathon training in this classic where, I mean, hearing you speak is fascinating because I always like hearing stories how people get sort of into the sport, and it's so completely different to the way I got into the sport, right? I grew up foothills in the Alps, and
right.
I go hiking fast, right? And so for me, my approach is always like, how do I sort of keep myself fit so I can be up on mountains? And so your approach is this very focused sports focus. You know your
Yeah.
numbers, you know your pace, you know all the important races and stuff. And so all of a sudden, you open this door to this ultra. You run through the night. You run on trails. I mean, it's a huge departure in some respect, right?
Oh, it's very much a departure. And what I found funny, well, so here's the thing is, because so I totally get what you're saying. Like, uh, it's always interesting to hear what people's currency is. In other words, where do they get paid? Like,
Mhm.
what's the payoff for them?
Perfect.
And for me, like one of the big things I've always been just fascinated with was, and even since I was a little kid, was how far can I push,
Yeah.
and until, like, what's at the end? Like, where is the end? Is there an end? Maybe
Hmm.
there isn't. Like, you
Hmm.
don't know.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll never forget. Perfect example is freshman year. I went out for the soccer team in high school, and we had a really good soccer team. And in tryouts, doing everything, and they had a timed 3 mile run, and everyone ran, like all the varsity JV freshman team, everyone on this. So you're talking about 80 kids or whatever. And I'll never forget, I did this run, and it was a day kind of like today, 85, hot, humid. It's New Jersey. And I just remember doing the race, and I'm just picking people off on the way back on the second mile, just passing people, passing people, passing people, and finally get to the end. And and I think I finished like fourth or fifth overall as a freshman.
Hmm.
And I just remember my teacher pulling me aside, the coach, who was also my gym teacher, and he said to me, he goes, "Hey, um, I just want to tell you something. First of all, great performance out there today. And he goes, second of all is, I don't know how much soccer time you'll get on the field ever, but I will say this. You can run. And if you go out for cross country, they could use someone like you. And so it was he just recognized right away. He's like, this kid's a runner. He is not a soccer.
The best way of getting kicked out of the team.
I know, exactly. So, yeah, so stuff like that happens. And that's kind of how, I wound up ultimately doing some running. But going back to the 100 miles is, my dream was always to run Western States. I mean, that was my dream. And that's why it's so I had no idea of anything about qualifying, but I knew I had to take steps. So I took one of the steps was back in 2016 or something, after I had done some marathons, I decided I would try a 50K race. So I ran wow, I'm blanking on the race. It used to be in Tacoma at the park there, and now they don't have it anymore. It's Fort Steelicum used to have a 50K.
Okay. Yeah.
So I ran that. And then once I did that twice, I was like, okay, I can stomach that. Now I'm going to run Rainier to Ruston, which was a 50 miler. So I did that. And I was like, okay, that wasn't horrible. I actually did well in that. And then I did the 24-hour race because I figured, let me see if I can run 100 miles in 24 hours. And was able to do that. And then I went to the Yeti race for a full 100. And then I really wanted to run Western States. That was like my dream. And in order to get into that, you've obviously got to run a race that qualifies. So I wound up running Cascade Crest. The past 2 years, I've actually run it.
Yeah.
And man, that race was a beast. That is just, I will say this though, it did crack me up. I heard Jim Walmsley interviewed on another podcast, and Cascade Crest is like on his bucket list of races to run. So I feel fortunate. We're out here. We've got plenty of races to run. And Cascade Crest was one of those weird things where I was signed up to run Mountain Lakes in September 2 years ago, and I got off the wait list in Cascade Crest because Andrea Wilder from the Olympia Trail Runners, she was in the race and got pulled to run Western States, like off the wait list. And pretty much her spot, I was next. Like we joke, like if it wasn't for her running that, I wouldn't have gotten in. So I ran that and got my first chance to get in a lottery. And then I did it again last year. It's such a wonderful race. I love Jess Mullen. I love all the people who put that on. It's just amazing. But and then I put in for the lottery. I don't know if I put in the lottery for Hardrock the year before or not, but I definitely did Western States. So Western States was my goal race. And then of course, as you know, it's lottery. And Western takes about 380 or something runners. Hardrock takes 150-ish, usually 145. And so this year, I put my name in for both races again, and I'm watching on the TV or my computer, I'm watching the Western States lottery, hoping I could get in. And I look down, and on my phone, I'm watching Hardrock just for giggles because I'm just curious to see who will get there. And I figure I'm a 2-ticket never, which they block it off in terms of who's run the race before and who hasn't, and how many tickets, and they take equal. They have a whole formula there. And all of a sudden, I see my name pop up on my phone, and I thought it was someone texting me or something like that. I didn't really pay much attention to it. And then my text starts blowing up. Like people from all over the country who I know, who I've run with, are just like, dude, you just got into Hardrock. And I'm like, that's impossible. My odds of getting in the Hardrock are like less than 1%. There's no way.
Yeah.
And it's like kaboom. And then, I was like in shock. So I walked out of the guest room where I was watching it, and I went to my wife and I go, I just got into the Hardrock 100. And she goes, well, you have to do it, right? And I'm like, I guess I kind of do, because like, what are the odds on you getting your name pulled twice? It's like,
yeah.
And I'm not young. I'm going to be 59. So it's like, guess I got to do this. So, and then life got very weird. Once I got into Hardrock. Life got very weird because all of a sudden, everything.
What's funny, and this is the reason why we wanna talk, because I wanted to have you on to talk about Hardrock and your preparation leading up and sort of catching up with you and sort of getting all the story leading up to it has been amazing. I think around COVID time, I think that's when I put my attention towards Watershed a little bit more, and that's where we sort of connected. And I saw you running crazy miles at Watershed, which is a small little park in Olympia. They're like, I don't know, what's the total trail mileage?
Like, there's total trail mileage is somewhere. It's probably 3.5. I don't know.
Yeah. There's like a 1.4 mile loop in the bottom.
Yeah.
And then there are like little hills on the outskirts that you can sort of run up and down. And you've ran, even before your Hardrock training started, you've ran insane miles on there. Your level of commitment to the repetition of the trails at Watershed is borderline insanity. Let's face it.
Yeah. So I forget what chat I was on the other night where I made mention. I said to someone, I said, they had put out something in a chat to one of our trail groups saying, hey, I'm really interested in running a race, but I have a family and commitments. What's that going to mean to me? And I said, dude, I feel your pain. I know exactly what that means. And bad news, you're going to have to get up like really freaking early in the morning and find areas to get it done. The funny thing is, Matthias, is I call it the Dorothy training. And if you remember Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, the lesson she learns is sometimes you don't have to look any further than your own backyard. And it's like, hey, I got a hill in my backyard. If I run over and back, it's a kilometer with about 170 feet of 175 feet of elevation gain per kilometer. So if you do that, 50 times, you're going to be running somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 feet a mile. So if you do the math on that, that's pretty much what you're going to see at Hardrock. Hardrock's 33,000. This would be 30,000. If I did 100 miles doing the same stretch I'm doing, I'd be over 30,000 feet. So it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Because if there's one lesson I learned, at least in speaking with people and listening to stuff, it's like the best to the best of your ability, if you can train with an idea of the type of terrain and the physical demand you're going to be put under on the race day, that will help you the best.
Yeah.
And what's really messed up, going back to I kind of found the elevation thing in Watershed by accident, because I started looking at when I got into Hardrock, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to totally change my training philosophy, because I looked at what I had done for training leading up to Cascade Crest, which is by no means easy. It's like 23,000 feet of elevation up down.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I thought, Okay, I went into Cascade Crest with like I think 100,000 feet or maybe 115,000 feet of elevation gain in my training. I'm already right now at like 255 now
Yeah.
for Hardrock.
Hmm.
That's almost double what I ran all of last year in
Hmm.
elevation.
Hmm.
So it's like a totally different mindset.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's there's a there's a blessing and a curse to doing the same, you know, course, I would say. I love running in Watershed. It's just such a great place to run. It's just, I love the trails there. I love the hills there. Um, and also there's um, there's a certain comfort in that it's always the same trail, and you know where you are, and there's also a certain just like trepidation if you get too far ahead of yourself, just knowing, oh my gosh, I'm only 2 hours in. I have 8 hours left of running up and down this hill. I don't know if mentally I can do it. Like I'm gonna just, and it would be so easy to turn around and run the mile home.
Hmm. Hmm.
It would be so easy to quit. It's right there.
I mean, it is a good point. You say you call it blessing and a curse, and I think there is something amazing about finding a good training ground so close to home, right? I mean, you can have an aid station at home if you
Yeah.
want to halfway through, right? You know that you're not spending a lot of time traveling to remote trailheads. So when it comes to the convenience of balancing family life and stuff, you found the absolute perfect place. But to your point, the mental game is tough too. You are always running the same trail. You're not never really having to problem solve in an environment where you don't know what's happening, right? And so there's some challenge. You don't get the altitude training in either.
Oh yeah.
You
The
are at
out.
sea
Yeah.
level.
Right. You're still at sea level. I had an interesting situation arise where I had to fly back to the East Coast to an event, and it back at my old high school in Western Massachusetts, and it's at the base of a mountain, Mount Tom, which used to have a ski resort on it. I don't know if you can still ski up there. Um, Probably can. But I decided I was going to run up there just to see what it was like, and it's like a good mile climb. I took uh, an old road that used to be an access road, but they've since gated it off. But I ignored the signs and ran up anyway. Shush, shh, don't tell anyone. Um, but what I found was interesting was I ran that, and I was worried that I was said, all the hill work I've been doing has only been, let's say, a tenth of a mile or a quarter of a mile. It hasn't been a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles
The
climb.
continuous, yeah.
Right. It's not the same. And I got to tell you, I ran it and I was expecting it to be much harder, and it wasn't hard.
Okay.
It wasn't hard. And I began to realize is that the it's yeah, the altitude or the vertical comes in different sizes and shapes,
Hmm.
but the bottom line is at the end of the day is if you built yourself for it, then it's just mental.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's just that, yeah, you might have to take a different approach to it. You may not be able to run as quickly on it or whatever you want to do. But I will say this: in preparing for Hardrock, I would strongly make this argument, and is as I was studying for stuff in preparation, something numerically jumped out at me, which is if you want to finish Hardrock and you want to finish well, and you want to finish with a respectable time, or at least do it as quickly as possible. It is all about managing the climbs,
Hmm.
but it's really about what you do on the downhill.
Okay.
It's the downhills
Mm-hmm.
because you can't make up time climbing.
Mm.
That's a waste of effort. You're just going to burn way too. Downhill, you can make up time
Mm-hmm.
if you know if you're strong enough and you know what you're doing. Um, because if you can run the downhills well, you can even walk the flats and the ups
Yeah.
and still be okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's the downhill running that I think, and that's a skill set that a lot of people don't necessarily focus on. They're so focused on, oh, I'm gonna have, I'm in the Rockies, I got to climb. It's more the downhill. I think is much more technically hard, and create the eccentric action of on your muscles is much harder
Yeah.
than the actual climbing. I think climbing is what it's going to be. But if you wanted to, if you want to try to make up significant time or beat cutoffs, you're running downhill is going to get you there much quicker than trying to run up.
Yeah, this is a good thing here. I think I've observed this in a couple of my other races where I didn't do well, that I was like, well, the uphill I'm actually moving okay, but I'm actually losing time on the downhills because
Right,
I can't go faster. Yeah, that's a
right.
good observation.
And the question will be, um, can probably one of the things I'm most curious about will be for me at Hardrock is how am I going to feel at halfway?
Mhm.
Like I think that's going to be super important. Is like where do you what do you feel like? Because to your point is if your quads are already shot at halfway and you've got handies and other things, you've got big peaks ahead of you. You're going to be in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
That's going to be a problem. Um, that being said, um, I just feel, again, the other thing that I find interesting too is that it's hard to run watershed, I would say, fast when
Hmm.
you're doing those hill repeats because there's a lot of turns, it's steep, and you just can't run it fast. So what I've been able to do in training is spend a lot of time training at a speed that I would like to run,
Hmm.
as opposed to spending time at a speed either I want to have no business running and I will never run. Like,
Hmm.
I know, I look back at some of my training for Cascade Crest and it's like, yeah, I did a 25-mile run, but it might have been in watershed with a lot less hills and elevation gain. Or it might have been in sub Black Hills, or it might have even been in Capitol Forest. But the reality is the speed, I'm never going to run 12-minute pace for as long as I was running it in that. That's just
Hmm.
not going to happen.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
just not happening.
yeah.
So, um, it's like kind of trying to manage that.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's talk a little bit about kind of your larger training approach. So you get the news, your wife tells you you got to commit, you
yeah.
commit. And well, before we go into the training, perhaps we talk about this other thing. You sort of casually put your hat into the ring of Hardrock. Were you never interested? I mean, you put your head into the ring, so you were somewhat interested, but you talked about the allure and the excitement of wanting to run Western States. What did you feel about Hardrock? Were you just not expecting ever to
Okay.
get into it?
I, so it's, yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, Hard Rock scared the living bejesus out of me. I mean, I'm reading about that race and I'm just going, this sounds this doesn't just sound hard. This sounds dangerous. This
Hmm.
is like this is goes beyond, this goes it's like this could be the greatest experience of your life or it could end it depending on how it goes. um, there are also a lot of variables in there and you highlighted a few of them, related to altitude and things like that you can't really account for necessarily in all ways, shape, or form. So my feeling was, well, I've run a qualifier for it. I'm not getting any younger. And I had spoken with friends of mine who've been waiting for 10 years to get into Harvard.
Hmm.
It's like because it has half the entry opportunity
Yeah.
as some of the other more notable races, like whether it's Leadville or Western, or I know people who want to run the Vermont race, or
Mm-hmm.
Old Dominion, or even the Eastern states,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or other races. So, and there are tons of them in this country. And I have friends like yourself who've run UTMB, and that was on their bucket list.
Yeah.
So I just threw it in there because I was like, well, if I get in, great. But I mean, as it says in the advertising on its website, it's a graduate level race, which I'm like, okay, I kind of squeak by college right now. I don't know if I'm graduate school material, but I guess we'll find out. So I was, again, I was hoping for Western states, which I knew is, yes, there's elevation. Yes, there's challenges that come with it, but it's a much more runnable course,
Mm-hmm.
I would
Mm-hmm.
say, than Hardrock.
Yeah.
Hardrock is like a different beast.
Western States
Um,
feels like a runner's race, right? You can
yes,
approach it as a running event, wherein Hard
yes,
Rock feels like a wilderness adventure
yes,
with a bib on, right?
yeah. Hard Hard Rock. There is a lot that can happen there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say Western States is predictable, but there's more predictability than I would say Hard Rock.
Mm-hmm.
Hard Rock, I mean, the stories coming out of there that are told by whether it's Jeff Browning or Chris Twigg or Anna Frost or Jason Schlarb or whoever from those, it's like nuts. It's,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we were running, hailstorm came in, then rain, then it's sunny again and it's 90, and you're running through the night and it's windy, and it's, there's always something. There's,
And you're
it's,
really remote and really
yes,
high up, right? And I think the altitude just brings a sort of increased unpredictability of the
totally,
weather, right? It's a lot
totally.
harder to
It's,
forecast.
it's really hard,
Yeah.
and you've got to, right. And it's something where there's not a person, it is definitely a race where I've never heard a person say, I never hit a point in that race where I thought it wasn't going to be the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even the best runners are just like, oh my gosh, that was so hard.
Yeah.
Like, there was a point where you're just like, and I mean, you get in those points every race. I think, if any runner does for the most part, but this one is very different, as you said, just because of all the elements, the altitude, the trail, the history. I
Yeah.
mean, so yeah, so I got in, and it's like, and all of us, and that I realized I was like, in order to meet those, meet those challenges and be successful in this race, I was going to totally have to change how I train.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had already changed it once to go by heart rate. Now it was, all that I remember is, when I got in was, a friend of mine, Bao, who I've run with, who helped me like prep a little just mentally for Cascade Crest because he had done it a few times. I'll never forget what he said was, I said, yeah, I'm gonna run Hard Rock, and the first thing he said was, you better do a lot of climbing.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have to do a lot of climbing.
Yeah.
James Varney was kind enough to like reach out to me, the race director here in the state, and he was like, hey, I saw your name come up, congratulations. If you need any unsolicited advice, let me know. And he had too said, you're going to have to find a way to get all that climbing.
Mm-hmm. So
And
did you do anything else other than watershed then, or did you just do a whole lot more watershed?
I really just did a whole lot more.
Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, here's the funny thing, and this is cracks me up. So, there's a book, um, on Alpine Sports, and I'm blanking on I think Killian's one of the authors,
Yeah.
but it's
Training for the uphill athlete.
yes. So I stumbled across that in my Hardrock travels, and I bought a copy and I got it, and I said, I'm going to try to do this training and see what happens.
Okay. So also no coach,
No
self-trained.
coach.
Okay.
So my previous races, I've always done Hal Corner's training book. He has an ultra running book, and I swore by his training guide, and I would argue that it's awesome because it's gotten me to where I am today. But I will say I got the uphill athlete one, and it's a very different training. It's very different training compared to what I'm used to, and it's a lot of really hard week, like a really hard week, and then an easier week, then a hard week, then an easier week, then a hard week, and I was trying to mentally, first of all, I had to map in Watershed what was the path with the most vert.
Yeah.
And once I identified that, and as painful as it was to do the repeats, then I had to figure out, okay, how am I going to apply this to miles per day, and elevation I want to run a week. So it became at some points, it became less about the miles and more about how much elevation I want.
Okay. Yeah.
But I had weeks where I was running 80, 90, 100 miles a week. I will finish this training block hopefully by the end of this weekend. I'm going out tonight at like 2 a.m. or tomorrow morning. I think I'll have like 4 or 5 weeks with over 20,000 feet of climbing a week.
Nice.
And a few of those were like mid 20s, 26, 27,000. And I did back-to-back 10,000 foot days. So I'm hoping that's enough, but the one thing was, I don't know, to your point is like, you haven't gone anywhere. You're just doing this single, is this going to be enough? But I will say this, the one thing that cracked me up was on Strava, there's a Hardrock 100 group.
Okay.
People who are running. So I'm always curious about jumping in and seeing, hey, I wonder what, what's Zach Miller running this week? Guys who are going to be in the race. Like, what does their training look like? And I'll never forget this. I was looking at stats and I said, I'm going to just look by numbers. And that particular week, I had done like 96 miles and like 26,000 feet of climbing. And I'm looking, is anyone doing anything close to that? And I saw someone who had, and I was like, oh, this guy's doing close to that. And I click, and it's like Jason Schlarb, who like won the race in 2016. And I thought to myself, okay, if the guy who won the race is doing similar, now granted, I'm doing the same mileage and elevation. However, he's doing it like 12 hours faster.
The commitment to the time is amazing.
I know. I'm doing it in like 26 hours over the course of the week or whatever, and he's doing it in like 15.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But it's like, okay, take time out of the equation. If it's all about getting the work in, I'd like to think I'm getting the work in. I mean, math is, in my opinion, it's math. So it's like, I guess we'll see. But
and when you're out there, then you're full on with poles and your full pack, which would also be super important, right? So you're going through Watershed with the poles, which is amazing. Like you're crossing the same person walking their dog like 20 times.
Absolutely.
I always feel so bad whenever I do these repeats. I always feel like the first time you say hi, whatever. The second time it's funny. The third time you start feeling kind of embarrassed and like, sorry to inconvenience you yet again.
Yeah, so the funny thing is the hill segment I do is kind of out of the way. So a lot of people, I won't necessarily see people multiple times unless they're doing the lower loop in there a few times. The hills are kind of, it's a maintenance trail, and I go up and down. However, I have been stopped. I actually have, like, I would say, friends now, because I see them at the same
Mhm.
time in the morning, and
They
they're like
expect you by
walking their
now.
dog, and
Yeah.
they're like, "Hey, how's it going?" Like, at first they just thought I was the crazy person running with poles and a full pack, uh, and now they like recognize me as, "Oh, you're the guy who runs in the park." Now it's like it's almost like a friendship.
You're
And
like
there's
the mayor.
another,
You're the mayor of Watershed now. Come on.
yeah, and then there's another guy, Taylor, who I see all the time walking his dog, and it turns out he's a runner too, and we have friends in common, and we just stumbled across each other. Like, he saw me one day, and he was like, "Oh my God, this guy's got to be on Strava. I got to find
Hmm.
this guy."
Hmm.
So, and then, but I have had some really interesting, run-ins. I was stopped by two women a couple of weeks ago who were just like, "What are you training for? I see you in here all the time."
Yeah.
Like, and I tried to explain to them, and they were just like, "Wow, all good luck, man. That's pretty amazing." And then, and then one of my friends, Ricky Gant, who's running Cascade Crest this year, he saw what I was doing in Strava, and he's been doing the same path, doing the
He's
same
trying
trail.
to steal your local legend
Yeah,
status,
yeah,
which is like
exactly.
impossible because you have like 400 repeats
Yeah,
in the same
I was
segment.
at 720 on one segment, and I'm thinking, okay, that's probably good for life. I don't know. Good luck.
Unfortunately, I think they drop after like 3 months or something like that.
Oh yeah. So anyway, Ricky was funny because he saw me in the morning before school, um, running, because he went in for a quick run as part of his training, and then he came back in at lunch, and I was coming up the hill with my poles and stuff, and he was coming down, and he just looks at me, and his eyes wide open, and he goes, "Please tell me you have not been here since I saw you at 6." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah, I
Mhm.
have." Because if one thing is that, the hills aren't easy, the miles aren't easy in there. And so you're going to be running somewhere around 18-minute pace, 20
Mhm.
minute pace. So quick math, if you're doing 20 minutes, that's 3 miles, and you got 30 miles to go, that's 10 hours.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and again, this is where, I'll be honest, I don't know how I mean, only to be a pro athlete, but I think the more amazing thing is, um, I got kids, I got responsibilities, I have a full time job. So I'm getting up, I've been getting up and doing my longer runs. You have to get up at 2:30 in the morning to be out by 3. And your point's well taken. Of For me, it's a lot easier. I'd rather have the 2 hours to get 6 miles in Watershed than lose the hour driving one way or another to another site. I
Yeah.
mean, I just don't have the luxury of losing those 2 hours in travel,
Mhm.
because then
Yeah.
I'm gone for full days, and it
Yeah.
just becomes a problem.
I think that there is an advantage, probably, especially from a mental and an experience point of view, to throw yourself into places where you're not that familiar with the terrain. But when it comes to just purely training your body, being able to do it as close as possible to where you live,
Right.
and being able to therefore maximize and still holding all of your other commitments down, it's the much better decision, right?
Yeah. And I thought about it. I mean, this is going to sound funny, but someone said to me, "Oh, you should, it might be better for you to go try some untested grounds or whatever." My thing is, well, where would that be? Because I've run Capitol Forest a bazillion times.
Yeah.
Like, so I know that pretty well. It's
Hmm.
not going to be a huge shock to the system. Yeah, maybe I could go to Mount Rose, but I could, if I ran up and down that a few times, okay, so now I know that.
Hmm.
So when
Yeah.
do you not? you know, the one place I thought about going, which I think would be kind of cool, is maybe, going to, I think it's Goats Peak or whatever, going back and doing some of the Cascade Crest Trail
Hmm.
or course, because
But
that
it's also
trail is
still
fun.
early in the season, right? I
Oh,
mean,
I
a
know.
lot
Well,
of,
there's some places I couldn't even get to.
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah,
really would have loved to have run them, but there's too much snow.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
You're still
and I've,
struggling with it.
yeah, I have friends of mine who've been out even in the last 2 days or so, were just like, yeah, we were going to go out to here and Rainier, and it's still all snowed in. You
Hmm.
can't.
Yeah,
And so then it's like, okay, then what do you do?
yeah.
Um,
And
but I do think, yeah,
it's
go
tricky
ahead.
too if you're I've talked with a lot of people who have a specific training goal, right? If you go out for an adventure, it's one thing to deal with weather or snow conditions and stuff. But if you're going out for an adventure, you need to be okay with aborting the mission, right? With deciding the
Yeah,
conditions aren't right, too much blowdown after the
totally
winter or something, right? But that can really screw up your training, right? If you
true.
already drove for a while and you were hoping to get a specific miles of vert in and then have to make that decision, it puts you into a difficult place, right? So it's
Right.
better to really focus um, on this. And I mean, based on what you've been telling me, is you are very much number driven too, right? I mean, these numbers have worked for you. Following
Right.
sort of a very specific plan, it has brought you success. So let's talk a little bit about nutrition.
Hmm.
In preparation for Hardrock, how have you approached it? I mean, you've run 100 milers, you know what works for you, but how you're sort of going into this?
Yeah, so I'm gonna knock on wood. I'm kind of blessed, and I have like a cast iron stomach. I've never had stomach issues in a
Nice.
race. That's never been. I will say this though, the altitude's going to be interesting
Hmm.
because that does impact not just how you process food, but whether or not, your thirst, your hunger. Like you're going to have to force yourself probably to eat and do more of that than and drink than you're maybe used to. Um, I'm a big fan. I feel fortunate. I was going to say how life changed once I got into Hardrock. Life changed because companies that are involved in ultra running and in the race in particular started reaching out and saying, "Hey, would you be interested in being an ambassador for this or helping out? We'll give you a deal on these things." And so there are three companies that I've been working with that I really have enjoyed. The first is um, I I'm a big fan of like real food, trying to get to as real a food as I can. And I use Spring Energy gels, and have been using those during my training, and those have really worked well. It's not that I don't like goo or other types of gels. I like Honey Stinger. I've used that too, but Spring doesn't taste like a big sugar bomb. And it's like sometimes I feel like while the sugar is helpful from a caloric intake, it's just such simple, digestible. It has its moment, but sometimes you need, and I know I'm going to need like real food
Hmm.
because hard rock, hard rock's cutoff is 48 hours. So
Hmm.
that's a long freaking time to be out there. That's two
Hmm.
sunrises. So,
You can't just
that,
do that on honey sting or
yes,
booze
yeah,
or whatever, right? I
exactly.
mean, you need
And
something else. So, what do you say about the spring controversy then? Like,
yeah, so I found it. I found it somewhat funny. I only found it funny because at one point I was taking stuff, and I felt like it wasn't kind of I felt like wow that didn't feel like it gave me the same caloric or carbohydrate
hmm.
boost, and
Hmm.
I thought it was just maybe it was just me or where I was. Um, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it's one of those. I mean, I'm sure there are other hydration and or nutrition companies that probably have inflated numbers as well. So I don't know how much to read into it. I will say this though, I just love the ingredients and I love how the stuff tastes, and it tastes like I'm eating something,
Yeah.
which I like.
I mean, I've
Um,
been a big spring fan too.
yeah, I mean, it's
For
amazing.
essentially the same,
Right.
essentially the same reason, right? I mean, I never could handle the goose. I couldn't get
I,
them
I
down, right?
I don't mind them if in a pinch, but I don't look at it this way. I can't imagine doing that for 48
Yeah,
hours.
yeah, exactly.
That I would be in sugar overload. And
Yeah.
mind you, I'm the guy who's going to eat quesadillas and other things at aid stations usually, but I
Hmm.
don't know if I'm going to be able to stomach that
Hmm.
in at altitude. So spring, some of the spring meals that are like 300 calories, like the oatmeal stuff, that stuff may be just like killer awesome if you just need to have quote unquote breakfast one
Yeah.
morning and you're just like not the last thing you want to do is try to chew something.
Mhm.
Like you just are not there mentally to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
The other thing is I have been a huge Tailwind fan for years. I use it as my hydration. I love their stuff. I love it both caffeinated and non-caffeinated. I carry one caffeinated, one non with
Hmm.
2 liters of water.
Hmm.
Um, and the I find that my mix, I usually go harder on the scoops than maybe I actually do 3 scoops probably for my 18-ounce bottles.
Hmm.
And I have found that if you can just every half hour or so, just take a couple of sips with some water, that's usually enough to get me through like another half a mile or a mile.
Hmm.
Like you just got to pace. It's kind of like if you think of intravenous feeding,
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
just has to be a constant.
Yeah.
You have to. I'd rather take smaller, more constant hydration than be run and try to get it all done at an aid station
Yeah.
or at the top of a mountain.
Yeah.
And that is hard. That is a mental. So I would say for anyone out there training, that is something you're going to have to work at. I know
Hmm.
some people who like set their watch to
Hmm.
drink and eat. I can't. I can't do that. I
Yeah.
find that really, really annoying. So, and then the other thing is I love my poles. I have Black Diamond Z's. They're amazing. They collapsible. And Nathan has been kind, and I use their Pinnacle vest, which is awesome. I would just say be careful when you're sizing it because I would maybe go up whatever size you think you are. However, the Nathan products are awesome. I really like their stuff. And I have insulated bottles and my hydration bladder. And that freaking vest holds a lot of stuff. And you're going to need the only other thing I would say, and I don't have any sponsorship affiliation with them, but I will say the greatest piece of equipment I have purchased in the last 6 months, hands down, at the recommendation of some of the guys from Hardrock is if you do not own a Patagonia Houdini jacket, get one.
Oh. Oh,
Friggin',
interesting.
it is the friggin' great. It weighs nothing, and I've run in this thing in pouring rain in Watershed, in the wind. It keeps you warm. It's not necessarily waterproof by any stretch, but it dries so fast. And I have been living in my Houdini jacket. And get this, it is like it. I mean, I think it's like $85 or something at REI. They're
Hmm.
not. They're not like
But they're
art.
super thin
Art.
though, right?
Yeah, they're super thin, but they're warm. They're strangely warm. They capture heat well.
Hmm.
Um, but they're just, they feel like tissue paper. I
Yeah.
mean, I couldn't believe how light it was. But I went out one morning where it was cold and windy, and the wind was whipping, even down in Watershed. And I was just like, I can't believe how warm I feel in this thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it beats the heck out of paying. I mean, as much as I love some of the Aterics and some of the other things that are available, those things are way out of my price range. Again, it's
Yeah.
like I'm not, I'm not, I don't know. I wish I only had the sponsorship that some of those folks have, but I don't. So
What shoes you're running in? Since we're talking
oh,
going down the gear stack.
so here's the funniest and very embarrassing story about my shoes. So you'll love this. I had run in Brooks Cascadias forever. I love that shoe. I mean, I love that shoe. When it came time to run my first Cascade Crest, um, I went to go buy them. And of course, this is right after COVID. So there's supply chain, everything's going on. There were none left in my size anywhere in the country. And I'm totally freaked out because I know the pair I want to run in or would have to run in had at least like 350 miles on. There was no, and I did not want to go into a race. So I was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place and I didn't know what to do. So I just said, yeah, you know what? I'm going to just have to crack and I'm going to run in a new pair of shoes I've never tried before. I guess I'll do. So I was in Princeton. I was New Jersey where my dad lives. And I didn't have I needed a pair of shoes and I had to do a 30-mile run out there and in the woods. And I just went down to the local REI and I bought a pair of Speed Goats and tried them on and liked them. I mean, it took me a while to get used to the stack height and the difference.
Yeah.
But took them out on the trail and they worked for me. So I said, well, I guess I'll run Cascade Crest in them. And of course I run Cascade Crest in them and I get to the finish and I said, wow, these Speed Goats were great. This is the first time I run a race in them. And the guy I'm talking with actually had been one of the testers and worked for Brooks on the Cascadia and was explaining to me the reason it's named the Cascadia is because they tested all the shoes in Cascades. And I was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed right now. Wow. I said, dude, I love your shoes. It's just that I couldn't get them. So ever since then, I've been living the mantra of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I'm going to be running in Speed Goats. I actually just got.
So you never went back to get to the Cascadia?
I never went back. I just bought a.
Brooks' heart's broken. That is harsh.
I just got an order from Hoka this week. I just got my order in. I got 2 pairs of brand new Speed Goats. And here's you'll like this. One of the trials and tribulations of running early in the morning was, I don't know how you do it, but I put numbers on my shoes because I rotate shoes. I never run in the same shoes, the same back-to-back days, ever.
Yeah.
Because I want the midsole to at least get 24 hours to reinflate. So I have like 5 pairs of Hokas right now, like the Speed Goats, and I also run in the Clifton on the road. I've gone away from Brooks altogether. But the weird thing was, it was 2:33 in the morning, and I had to do a run. I had to do my first like 30-miler in Watershed, and I remember I was like halfway through, and I thought, man, I feel really tired. Like I'm feeling all these rocks. I don't know what's going on. It might be maybe it's just me, I didn't think anything of it. And so I get home and I'm taking my shoes off. I get the run done. I'm taking my shoes off. It was like 32 miles, 10,000 feet of climbing, 10 plus hours, 11 hours. I get home, I take my shoes off, and I notice like the top is all torn. Like the top of my Speed Goats are all torn. It's all damaged. And I thought, oh my God, I only have like 200 miles on these things. This is what, you know what? I'm riding Hoka. This sucks. This is horrible. So I'm typing Hoka an email and I'm trying to take photos of the damage of my shoes. And as I'm taking a photo, I load it up, into the computer, and I look, and the photo and the number on the shoe was 1. And I thought, wait a minute. I ran in my first pair
Oh
because
my.
I'm on like pair 4 and 5. So I went into my Strava and I look, and that pair of shoes had like 500 miles on them.
Oh yeah, yeah. You're like
And I was like, oh my
delete,
God.
delete, delete. Guess
Yeah.
Hoka
I
doesn't get
was
an
like,
email.
but I was just like, no wonder my feet hurt. No wonder I felt so beat up. I mean,
Mhm.
these are the shoes you cut the grass in
Yeah, yeah.
you do your yard work with. So, but I love my Hokas. I mean, I know that the 6 just came out in the Speed Goat, but I'm a little leery of trying like a whole different model because I've been running in the 5s all through training. So I just got new 5s. I'll probably try the 6 later in the summer. Um, and I'll tell you this: I heard I know the Cascadia has been a little rebuilt over the last year or so. So, and I might want to give those a whirl. I also have friends of mine who run in, I think it's the Caldera, which is
Mhm.
their newer shoe, which I've never tried, but I've heard good things about.
The stack
Um,
height is
yeah,
massive on these. Like it's too much for me. Like if
right. So the stack height on the Caldera looked a little crazy.
Mhm.
Um, the Speed Goat is actually not that bad, and
Mhm.
I think it's predominantly because um, and you can feel it if you run on a road with trail shoes, you'll feel the difference um, of how they're built through the midsole,
Mhm.
and that they're meant to they're meant to be run on you know on trails on ground.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so this, while they're cushy, it pales in comparison to, let's say, the Bondi or some other motion control shoe they have, which is the stack height. You just stand in them and you feel like you're in platform
Yeah, it feels
heels.
like marshmallows.
I know. It just doesn't. And also it starts to mess with your stride.
Hmm.
Um, and that's one thing, yeah, I've struggled with too. But I will say this: I mean, for as much as I know we're talking about trails, for as much as we run on trails, I do try to get road runs in on occasion. I do
Hmm.
find them helpful from a cadence standpoint,
Hmm.
um, and just get used to leg turnover because you don't want to do too much slow running. And there's also Killian has a number of workouts that he does, like bounding workouts and speed, short bursts up hills that I've incorporated because you just can't do everything slow.
Yeah, yeah. No,
It becomes a problem.
that's what I'm learning too. I've been very much enjoying the focus on actually, even though I call myself a trail runner, doing quite a bit of work on the roads. Just because I'm faster, right?
Yeah, I mean
So,
it, and there's a certain beauty, I would say, to I forget what it was. I had to do like a 15-mile run, and I decided I was going to run out from where I live out to the Chehalis Trail and loop around and go around the lake and come back up. And there was a certain like enjoyment I had of doing that run and being done in like
yeah, right?
2.5 hours or
I know.
something. And it's just like, wow, that I wasn't out there all
Mm-hmm.
day.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the other thing that I really enjoyed about my marathon training leading up to it. I was like, oh wow, my Saturday run didn't occupy my entire Saturday.
Yeah,
This was nice. Yeah.
it's just kind of bizarre because you can go out and you can get up at 5 in the morning and be out by 6 and be done by 8. And
Hmm.
it's like, wow, I got my whole day. And that really works,
Yeah.
so
To wind this down, let's talk a little bit about your travel plans. I mean, I know, right?
I know this is
Silverton
where I
is
wish I was a sponsored athlete. I'm like, no one's, I think if you can actually travel, if you can actually get to Silverton, they should give you a freaking buckle for that.
I, you, you know, it's funny that you say you wish you'd be a sponsored athlete. I mean, in a sense that somebody else would pay for it, maybe. But I've been talking with Katharina Hartmut, who is going to come over from Germany to run Hardrock, and she lives in Zurich right now, and she has a driver's license, but she barely drives because public transportation in Switzerland, right?
Right.
And even on her like training runs in training bike rides in the winter, she like takes the train to the south side of the Alps where it's warmer and snow free, and she does her training, and then she takes the train back. And she contacted me a few weeks ago, and she's like, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to get to Silverton, and I don't drive. How do I make this work?
Right.
Right? It
Yeah.
is, to your point, you need a buckle just to arrive in Silverton. So,
Yeah. And also the other thing is like, so let's say you fly into Durango, and let's say you even drive. Like I was thinking about it. I'm doing the logic, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to run for 48 hours. I don't care how much sleep I'm going to get the next day. I don't know if I want to operate a vehicle on those roads going back.
hmm hmm
So, what I would say is there's the the folks up there lean on the kindness of strangers. But to your point about the travel and the altitude, I've talked to a number of friends of mine, including those that are doctors, and they pretty much have told me that in order to try to address the altitude situation for yourself, there's really two schools of thought. Either get in, you know, sometime before 48 hours and just get in the race and do it,
hmm
or get there 10 days ahead of time and give
hmm
yourself plenty of time to acclimate.
Okay.
But anything in between, like 2 to 3 days and 10 days, may not bode well for you.
Okay.
So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fly in Wednesday. I think I get in the evening on Wednesday. And Thursday is basically number pickup, drop bags, all that good stuff, and start the race Friday morning at 6 a.m. No muss, no
Amazing.
fuss.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Well, I'll see you there. I'll be there. I'll arrive Monday to host a film festival on Tuesday in Uray.
yeah, that's
Um,
exciting. That'll be
mhm,
great. I'm
yeah.
I'm I'm sure people will love it, and you'll probably get a great turnout.
Yeah.
Yeah, my big thing is just like I'm already starting to get overwhelmed with all the nitpicky details of, you know, do I have all the right chargers? Do I have all the right batteries? I've started running um, with a waist lamp instead of a headlamp, which
Okay.
I have found, because here's the reason why. I was concerned about wearing a headlamp for as long as I may be out there, because I find over time, like my neck starts to hurt, like having
Okay.
the weight on your head.
hmm
I'd rather have it around my waist. It's a lot more manageable.
hmm
Um, but yeah, all the batteries, all the all that good stuff.
You are in a very crucial and
Yeah,
final phase of packing and preparation. In some respects, when it comes to training, the hay's in the barn almost,
yeah.
right?
I agree. I agree. I keep telling myself regardless of how much I want to run this weekend, or I'm 3 weeks. It'll be 3 weeks roughly. I'm a little worried about the only reason I'm doing. I would argue I don't have to do this weekend. I'm probably good where I am, but I want to, because I worry about getting stale waiting a whole month to
hmm
do something. Um, but I will. But I think you're right. And the other thing is that I'm kind of excited for, that I have in the back of my mind when I'm getting overwhelmed, is the people are like, "Aren't you scared? Like, what goes through your mind when you know you're there and the gun's going to go off, they're going to start the race. What goes through your head when 100 miler starts?" And I tell people, I'm like, that's the best part of the race. Before, other than finishing, the best part of the race is the start.
Mhm.
And they said, why? And I said, because I know, in this case with Hardrock, I know for at least possibly the next 48 hours, I don't have to worry about email. I don't have to worry about talking to people about work
Mhm.
or taking out the garbage, or everything melts away.
Yeah.
There's only one thing that's important, and that's whatever the next step is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just the next step and the next step after that.
Mhm.
And just enjoy it. Just
Mhm.
be there. It's just going to be, and you know, I don't know if you've been up there. I mean, you've lived in the Alps, so you kind of get it. But friends of mine who've been up there, who've run some of the trails there, all they say is, I could show you pictures of where I've been, and they don't do justice to how beautiful it is.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
are, we are the spoiled people. We're going to be. I feel thankful that trail running takes us places like this, where we get to experience the world at its best.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
people are, I mean, I'm sure you experience this elsewhere too. The people are just amazing.
Mhm.
So the people who've been involved in the race, the volunteers, I have a pacer who's going to be joining me for half the race, who I met online, who's a good runner, and we've been talking, and just like their willingness to go above and beyond to make this a special opportunity and really bring community to this race is just blows me away.
Mhm.
So yeah, this is, I'm hoping I can pass the quote unquote test and complete the race. I think I'm in a good spot to do that. And then of course the joke is, to be a true hard rocker, you got to run it both ways. So then I'll have to go back on
Oh,
it.
so now,
Yeah, you
all
got to go.
right.
So even
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
year is clockwise, odd
Mm.
year is counter.
Oh.
So I'll have to figure out when I get in. I've been meeting Chris Twigg, who's like you'll probably see him up there for the festival. Uh, he cracks me up because he's run the race 16 times, and I want to say 15 of them are clockwise. Like, in other words, for whatever reason, even year lotteries,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
done magnificently well.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I mean, it's going to be crazy. If someone told me a year ago, hey, you're going to be on a start line and Courtney Dauwalter is going to be in the same race, I would have laughed in their face. I would have been like, yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Francois Dehane is going to be there. I'm like, oh my God, I hope I don't totally fanboy out at the number pickup and they like just kick me out of Silverton.
I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about our sport, though,
I
right? I
know
mean,
it is.
you started off talking, and I'm always fascinated when I'm connect with people like you, because your approach, your history is so different to getting into the sport. And there's a part of me where I don't even connect with this. I have a hard time really wrapping my head around this. But then we talk through this, and we're coming to a place that trail running at the heart is something beautiful and it's something simple, and the community is incredible, and meeting the people and making these connections, and this sort of vacation for ourselves that we give ourselves by not having to worry about our commitments and everything. We can just focus on being human and moving in the mountains. It's so beautiful, and it's
It's
so
yeah.
universally under, it connects us. I mean, not universally, some people don't get it, but for those who appreciate it, there is something wonderful there.
No, it really is. I mean, the other day, um, I was talking to someone I was at my 40th reunion for my high school, and I was talking to someone because all my friends are really interested in this now, and I've got like, they all want to get the link to follow me like
Yeah.
during the race, because many of the races we run, there isn't that opportunity to track someone like there is at races like this, where
Mhm.
they know probably within 2 feet where you are at any point in time.
Yeah, yeah.
So people are really excited. And I was explaining like this race to someone, and they literally like, wow, that's amazing. And had to turn away because I started to literally get emotional. Like I almost started to cry because I'm thinking to myself, how lucky am I to be in this position? Now, you could argue luck is the residue of design. Yes, a lot went in to put yourself in a position for this opportunity, but still it's opportunity nonetheless. And it's that opportunity to find more out about you and have that experience with other people too. And that is just goes beyond. I mean, there are very few things in life that kind of touch those chords. I would say getting married does, maybe having children, maybe experiencing the death of a loved one or a parent, maybe in a different way. But it's like seminal moments when you think of. When I always ask runners to think back of, like, if they finished a race, when I say, what was that initial feeling like you crossed the finish line and you realized, when was that moment that you realized you did it? It's amazing to see how fast that breaks a person's facade down and they become emotional, like it becomes an emotional conversation. Because it's just, to your point is you just got to get it. I mean, it's something special.
No, it truly is fantastic. Well, you've got a couple more weeks.
I know.
Do you mind if we share your Strava link? I don't know if it's public.
But please, by all means.
We'll link it in the show notes. People have to go back and check out your runs because these runs at Watershed are hilarious and amazing.
Yes, as someone explained it, someone called it there. I pointed out, you got to do a lot of training kind of like this. And one of my friends just pointed out, goes, Michael, no one should do training like you do. No one. It's not okay. If it was anyone, if I didn't know you, I would say I would seriously have you seek help.
But I mean, I feel like the way you've approached it, though, I mean, the way you talk about it, you've never really found a way of automating it. I mean, to your point, you're not even listening to music. You're really in the present in the moment, and so I think it works.
There's so much that's going on around you every day, and we take it all for granted. We take everything for granted. I mean, it's like I've gotten to the point now where there's a raccoon Jerry. I call him my friend because I see him every so often in Watershed. And the other day I was running and there was like a doe and her fawn, and they were kind of like following me. Or I've gotten to the point now where I literally was running and there was a chipmunk that I kept scaring off until I think like the fifth time I passed him, and then he just stopped. He stopped being bothered by my presence. Like he stopped moving off the trail. I got worried that I was going to step on him, but he was like, he's like, oh, I know. No, that's just the guy who runs on the trail now.
That's amazing.
So, it's crazy.
Fantastic. Michael, thank you so much for coming on Singletrack. Thank you for telling us your story of how you got into all of this madness and now soon to be at the start line of Hardrock. I'll see you up in Silverton. I'll cheer you on. And awesome. I'm probably going to be in a place where I've never wanted to run Hardrock. I respect the race, but for me, I've never really had the desire. So it's going to be very interesting. I fear that once I'm up there, my mind's going to change. And
it will.
Right?
I know.
Right?
I'm not even going to tell you you're going to become a convert.
I know. I'm worried about that.
It's hard not to. That's like you and me, that's like me and UTMB.
You see?
Same thing.
Same thing. All right, Michael. Thank you so much.
Mitch. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for coming on Singletrack and for sharing your story and all of your training that went into getting yourself ready for hard rock. All the best to you. We'll be rooting for you and following your tracker. And thank you, dear listeners, for joining us and for all the support throughout the years. More links and info in the show notes at singletrack.fm. This was Singletrack, and I see you over on Electric Cable Car for daily trail and mountain news and a very special hard rock coverage. I'm your host, Matthias Eichler, saying Auf Wiedersehen und Tschüss.